So we just like to, as always, welcome everyone to New Perspectives, which is being hosted by LaGrosse Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center here in Fountain Inn, South Carolina. And I'm Radhe. I'm joined by Dr. Vladimir Yatsenko and H.P. Rama, who is founder and president of our university and the benefactor of Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Centers. So today we continue our 8-part series on the coming of the subjective age. And with us is Jared Quek, who will address the renaissance of the integral sciences and the importance of the development of the inner sciences for the subjective age. So we welcome you, Jared, and as we were saying before, we appreciate that you are joining us at 11 at night in Singapore, and apologize for the lateness, but we are thrilled to have you here as always. In Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo states, physical science itself, with all its achievements, can never achieve happiness and fullness of being for the human race. Our true happiness lies in the true growth of our whole being, in a victory throughout the total range of our existence, in mastery of the inner as well as, and more than, the outer, the hidden as well as the overt nature. Our true completeness comes not by describing wider circles on the plane where we began, but by transcendence. So today, Jared maintains that pioneering communities will press inwards to explore our large mental, vital, physical, and spiritual selves in the coming era of mental subjectivism. Through this endeavor, he states, we can look forward to a rebirth of many inner sciences that will complement our physical knowledge. In today's session, Jared will draw on Sri Aurobindo's works to outline some key developments we can expect and explain how these sciences can complement and empower the path of integral yoga. As always, there will be time for Q&A, so please post any questions you have in the Q&A box or raise your hand. Thank you, and Jared, I will hand it over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. I think just now Radhe has already read this passage, which is also in the so-called poster that was sent out. So today's talk is really about the Renaissance, which means the rebirth of what may be called the integral sciences, sciences that allows us to know not just the physical plane, but the different planes that we truly exist, that we actually exist on, the vital plane, the mental plane, the spiritual plane, however defined, and so on and so forth. So I'll start with the limitation of the physical sciences, or should I say the limitation? I mean, we live in an age of science and technology. America in particular is very gifted, of course, we all know, in science and technology, possibly being the most advanced nation, in fact, in science and technology. So, and we know the wonders that physical science has accomplished. It has made the lame walk, the blind see, literally. And it can even maybe one day raise the dead. I mean, sometimes it does that, for if the person is not dead for too long. So the point is, science, and of course, science has sent through technology, its application has sent people to the moon and does all sorts of wonders. To the extent that there are some, maybe even many, who may think that science is the ultimate knowledge, so to speak, the greatest form of knowledge that humanity has ever accomplished. And our future, the future of humanity, really consists of an indefinite extension of the physical sciences. Sri Aurobindo, while seeing with a clear eye the greatness of the physical sciences, also points out its limitation. The first one and most important one is already read out just now. So I'll read out again. So physical science itself, with all its achievements, though it may accomplish comfort, can never achieve happiness and fullness of being for the human race. Our true happiness lies in the true growth of our whole being, in a victory throughout the total range of our existence, in mastery of the inner as well as and more than the outer, the hidden as well as the overt nature. Our true completeness comes not by describing wider circles on the plane where we begin, but by transcendence. So we human beings, actually, in truth, according to Sri Aurobindo, and we can also finding out by ourselves, if we are willing to go through the journey, that we are not just the body, we are not just physical being. And so physical sciences, which basically master the physical world and our physical bodies, cannot leave us satisfied. There's something in us, even in those dominated largely by their bodily and vital needs, there's something in us that calls out for something more. And science itself and technology will find it extremely hard to accomplish it. It may indeed make the blind see, but can it grant true inner sight, the sight of our true being? It may make us comfortable, shield us from the rain, it may lead to economic growth, but can it lead to the ananda within, the bliss within, the true joy within? Could it even lead to harmonious relationships, true love with others, and so on and so forth? And I can go on and on. So, so it's clear that science, despite its accomplishment, is on one plane of existence. It's like we are living in flat land and we cannot go beyond it. But what we need as a race is actually to transcend where we are, our physical plane. And that cannot be done if we do not know the other planes which we simultaneously exist on. And Sri Aurobindo points out another problem, another profound problem with physical science. Science has attempted to move towards a control of mind and life processes by a knowledge of the material instrumentation and process of our normal and abnormal mind and life functionings activities. The spiritual is ignored as one form of mentality. It may be observed in passing that if this endeavor succeeded, it might not be without danger for the existence of the human race, even as now are certain other scientific discoveries misused or clumsily used by humanity mentally and morally unready for the handling of power so great and perilous. For it would be an artificial control applied without any knowledge of the secret forces which underlie and sustain our existence. So the thing is that intuitively, science right now is moving on to trying to understand mind and life. In other words, biology and psychology, the Western sciences that correspond to these two, right? But the in fact, that corresponds to mind includes computer science right now. As I have said in my earlier talk on transhumanism, right? So science is trying to use control the physical instrumentation. Transhumanism is basically trying to use this control and understanding of the material instrumentation to augment, to improve, to prolong, to expand the power of mind and life. And Sri Aurobindo obviously foreseen it. He says it right here, right? He says that if we try to do this, that means, just try to expand our power of life and mind just by focusing only on the material plane, it is in fact extremely dangerous. He does not elaborate fully why it's extremely dangerous, but I read it very carefully. There's a lot of, I would say, it's quite clear. There are at least two problems. One, the more obvious one, is that we human beings as a race have this tendency, unfortunate tendency, to misapply for highly destructive users, right? Our sciences and technology. The picture of the mushroom cloud there is quite self-explanatory. So we have reached a point where we are getting more and more power. Genetic engineering, cybernetics, artificial intelligence, we have talked about in earlier talks, right? Which is getting increasingly powerful in our world, have enormous destructive potential, even if they do also, of course, have a lot of constructive potential. Genetic engineering can easily be used for biological weapons. AI is already being used extensively for warfare, which is why now it's really a technological race between nations. And even more profoundly, if we try to control mind and life through the pure focus on the material, Sri Aurobindo wants that this is done in such a way that we actually do not really control mind and life properly. That means mind and life have their own rules, their own laws. And when we try to say, augment our intelligence, say by implanting chips in our brains, right? Or that kind of thing, or by integrating our biological brains with computers, which is the dream of some transhumanists, we actually risk a lot of things, maybe madness, darkness, and all sorts of things we cannot even predict because we don't truly understand what mental forces are. So this is quite a profound and prophetic warning, I would say, on why transhumanism, as far as the mainstream transhumanism is concerned, it can be so dangerous. Of course, that's not to say, because especially in the Life Divine, which is Sri Aurobindo's key, should we say, philosophical work, even though it's really much more than that, is a synthetic vision, right? And it does not deny that science has done great things. Most importantly, he says that advancing knowledge of the integral sciences should base herself on a clear, pure, and disciplined intellect. It is necessary too that she should correct her errors sometimes by a return to the restraint of sensible fact, the concrete realities of the physical world. So science, if nothing else, has trained the intellect. It's not, a scientist is deeply respected in most societies, regardless of culture, nationality. It's hard to find a country or society which denigrates science, even though, of course, I understand there are some movements, ironically, in America, which is the land of, which is so gifted with science, right? But regardless, to become a scientist means you have to commit yourself to a certain ethos, to a certain very long training. A PhD in science in America, which some of my friends do, is a really long, rigorous process lasting for many, many years, 5 years, 6 years, sometimes 7 years. And it is no guarantee of completion either. So it's a really long, hard, rigorous training, experimental methods, in intellectual training, statistical methods, in mathematics, in the actual sciences itself. It takes great courage in a way and commitment to become a scientist. And the training of the mind is very necessary. The other thing is, of course, to correct her errors that means ultimately, yes, common sense. We return to the physical world, we look at even the most highest, most transcendent physical science. Well, it is useful to, as a child of Earth, to return to the embrace of Mother Earth. So these two, and there are other great uses, or should I say, things that the physical scientists have done, and which will be important as a foundation for the integral sciences. The first is that science very soul is a search for knowledge. At its highest, at its noblest, is the search for knowledge, not for money, not for patents. Yeah. The second is that this profound drive of science toward monism, a unified view of reality, which is consistent with multiplicity. Science ultimately, especially physics, right, drive towards this unified view of the world, the unification of all the fundamental forces, one energy, right, that manifests the many. And that, Sri Aurobindo points out, is actually essentially identical with the one and the drive towards the one and the many in the Vedanta, although from a different perspective, of course. Even if science for now leads towards a materialistic kind of monism, it does not mean it cannot proceed beyond. In any case, this monism, which is consistent with multiplicity, this one that is the many, is something that needs to be preserved in the integral sciences. In fact, it's very much at the heart of the integral sciences. Also, science is a social endeavor, a collective activity by qualified individuals. That too is something important which need to conserve. So the integral sciences doesn't mean you are a mad mage hidden in the Himalayas or whatever it is, zooming out, doing your thing in a mage wizard tower. It needs to be a collective activity if it is to transform our society. Yeah, in fact, that is something I need to point out very early. When we talk about the integral sciences, I do not mean an individual knowledge. I mean a social knowledge. And when I say that there is a rebirth of this, I mean there's a rebirth of a collective activity. Yeah, there has always been occult geniuses throughout history, people with natural ability to tap into the inner worlds. But to have it as a collective activity is found only in certain civilizations and in certain periods, like say in ancient Egypt, where there are schools of Hika or magic or that kind of thing. But they're not the norm, actually. The advancement of science and entry into the gates is also governed by the progressive norms and methodologies. That means not just anybody can go into those gates. There need to be some standards. There need to be governance. And finally, there is this very egalitarian spirit of modern science, which is very, very attractive, which is that basically science is made accessible to anyone at all, who is willing to prepare themselves through a holistic education. As long as it's a meritocratic in that sense, you are willing to pay the price, go through the training and take the risk and invest in it, you will be able to be called a scientist, you will be able to do science. And of course, same for engineers, technologists, and so on and so forth. So these 5 things, I think, needs and will be preserved in any future endeavor in the integral sciences. And so what is this integral science? Of course, we briefly and quite clearly hint about it. There is a science, a knowledge, collective knowledge that aims at the understanding of multiple planes in which we already exist. I need to emphasize, we already exist in those planes. Right now, as we speak, even if we are, because, I mean, the fundamental problem, as Sherwin points out, is ego, right? We are completely identified with this outer mind, outer life, outer physical. We think of this as our so-called self. Oh, this is Jared. Okay, this is myself. This body, this little mind, this little life, this outside thing is me. Because we are so identified with this ego, shall we say, this egoistic consciousness, we lose sight of all the other vast subliminal planes that we simultaneously exist on. However, these subliminal planes do come out in dreams, in trance, or through special training, we can live in them. And that, in fact, is very much central to the integral sciences. And so the integral sciences really is about not being crammed and confined to our outer egoistic being, or worse still, just being crammed and confined to our physical being, to our supermarket being, shall we say, our stock market being, our vital being, our capitalist being, so to speak, but to be able to delve inner into the ocean of our true self, much deeper within our inner mind, our inner life, our inner physical, our psychic being, our Jivatman above, the divine within. So the integral science is essentially a collective activity where a group of women and men group together across the world, ideally, with standards, with governance to explore these inner worlds, but without losing the clear-sightedness that physical science has brought to us, right? So what is the starting point? The starting point, according to Sherwin, it seems, is to recognize our subconscious or subliminal, more accurately, subliminal mind. So behind it, our little mind is much vaster than it. There is a subliminal or subconscious mind, which is the greater part of ourselves and contains heights and profundities which no man has yet measured or fathomed. This knowledge gives us a starting point for the true science of force and its workings. It delivers us definitely from circumscription by the material and from the illusion of the obvious. I mean, this series of talk is really about mental subjectivism, right? And this writing here links clearly to our series here. So he's saying the starting point is really the exploration of our inner mind, which is what mental subjectivism is fundamentally about. It's the social era where there is this collective exploration of our inner minds. The inner mind is not our full self, of course, but it's the starting point. And mental subjectivism itself is the starting point that leads towards the spiritual age. That is made quite clear in my. So I explored that in some of the previous talks, and also it's written about quite fully in Sri Aurobindo's The Human Cycle. Coming back to this thing, I mean, this writing, it's interesting that Sri Aurobindo says that this knowledge gives us a starting point, a true sense of force. I mean, force is a term we associate with physics, right? Which is the most physical, or the physical sciences by definition. But he's saying that psychology and physics, therefore, are completely linked, and you cannot have a true physics without a true psychology. That is part of what's being implied here. that a true understanding of mind is necessary for a true understanding of matter. We do not know what matter is unless we know what mind is. And that is one of the key things we should understand from the integral sciences. And it's the starting point because it's through the subliminal mind and preferably with the help of the psychic and the divine that we enter into the exploration of the integral sciences. So he adds, in our outer being, we are children of the inconscience, a term he coined, right? Our inner being makes us inheritors of the higher heights of mind and life and spirit. The more we open inwards, go inwards, live inwards, receive from within, the more we draw away from subjection to our inconscient origin and move towards all, which is now superconscient, to our ignorance. So to live within and above, as above, so below, as within, so without, right? I mean, this idea is also central to the spirit of the inner sciences, of the integral sciences. So where scientists currently are trained to always look without with more and more powerful instruments, with greater space telescopes, with microscopes, with whatever, with computers, the inner scientists, the integral scientists will not only look without, but look within as well. There will be a rigorous training, just as rigorous as the kind of 7-year PhD that people have to go through nowadays. But at the same time, it is about the cultivating our inner faculties that is necessary. So in other words, it's the revival of what we might call occultism. Yeah. So I was just joking that many of my talks so far, I am in the shadows because of the lack of light, and maybe because of a lousy video camera. So, well, it fits. I guess we're talking about occultism, which is about the hidden, so-called hidden sciences, right? It's hidden because it's hidden to us who live in the ego. It's not hidden because it dabbles in diabolism and things like that, although there are unfortunate deviations of it that do that. So occultism, which has a bad name in many places, according to Sri Aurobindo, is this, and I think this is worth reading carefully. Occultism is, in its essence, man's effort to arrive at the knowledge of secret truths and potentialities of nature, which will lift him out of slavery to its physical limits of being, an attempt in particular to possess and organize the mysterious, occult, outwardly still undeveloped direct power of mind upon life, and of both mind and life over matter. There is at the same time an endeavor to establish communication with worlds and entities belonging to the supraphysical heights, depths, and intermediate levels of cosmic being, and to utilize this communion for the mastery of a higher truth and for help to man in his will to make himself sovereign over nature's powers and forces. So there are really many things in this text. The first is, of course, occultism is a form of power. That's without a doubt, right? It is a form of sovereignty. Knowledge is power. And only by knowing these powers and forces can we become so-called masters of this. Needless to say, it's not recommended that we make this an egoistic mastery of it. That can lead to many deviations, but it is a kind of sovereignty, preferably spiritual, preferably selfless, but regardless, it's a form of sovereignty. Then the second thing is that it is about understanding what some traditions call the tree of the universe, the world tree, the ladder of creation. That means we see the universe as a kind of ladder or tree that stretches many layers from the physical world all the way to the highest divine levels. And there are many beings, forces about all these, this world tree Drasil, right? And that kind of thing. So, and there is a province of occultism, which is often given a very bad name, where you sort of communicate with all these forces and use many of these little beings to do things, often things of mischief or stuff. I mean, it's found in many cultures. I mean, in Asia, for instance, there are all sorts of things like that, which is, I mean, people know it as part of popular culture. you may not believe in it, but they are there, and if you want to find someone to do this kind of mischief, it's actually not that difficult. So this exists, especially in cultures which are more ancient and so on and so forth, like the Chinese, the Indians, the Southeast Asian cultures, and so on. So, but this is given a bad name, rightly so. Of course, it need not be confined to such things. It's also about communicating and linking to much higher forces for spiritual transformation, like those done in the Tantras, for instance. Then here is really talking about how there is this potential for mind to act directly on the vital and physical planes, which is in essence what a future so-called technology will be. That the integral sciences will open this door for this direct intervention of our mental consciousness onto life and physical being. It will become normalized. So we do not need cumbersome machinery to do this kind of thing, but the mind can directly act on the forces of nature. And so this is, we may call the so-called technological aspect of this integral sciences, which to many may sound really fanciful, but to Sri Aurobindo is not fanciful at all. It's in fact something perfectly rational within the integral view of reality. And speaking about the integral view of reality, so it comes back that integral science is ultimately based on monism. That means unity, viewing reality as one, which is what the physical sciences is at its own way doing as well. But in this case, we are really talking about, should we say, a mother monism, a Shakti monism, a Chit monism, where we see the whole of creation as the differing manifestation of Chit, of consciousness, which is at the same time Sat and Ananda, right? So necessarily in such a view, the word consciousness changes in its meaning. It's no longer synonymous with mentality, but indicates a self-aware force of existence, Sat, of which mentality is a middle term. Below mentality, it sinks into vital and material movements, which are for us subconscient. Above, it rises into the supramental, which is for us the superconscient. But in all, it is one and the same thing, organizing itself differently. This is, once more, the Indian conception of Chit, which as energy creates the worlds. Essentially, we arrive at that unity which materialistic science perceives from the other end, which many asserts that mind cannot be another force than matter, but must be merely development and outcome of material energy. So again, we emphasize that if we truly view the cosmos, the manifestation as Chit Shakti herself, not that Chit Shakti is only the manifestation, but she transcends it, but she is also the cosmic and the individual within it. If we truly see that as being true, then what we just said about occultism must also be true. So Sri Aurobindo, in fact, makes that pretty clear throughout the Life Divine. And which means that ultimately, at its highest, the integral science is quite non-different from spirituality at its highest, because it's really about the knowledge of Chit, who is, as we all know, is the mother herself. And it is ultimately in the knowledge of the mother as all and as beyond all that is the very foundation of the integral sciences and of the integral technology. And that should we say is this fundamental difference between this or fundamental extension, should we say, beyond the physical sciences that needs to be very central. And what maybe, should we say, I mean, the practical uses of the integral sciences, because the integral sciences is knowledge, yes, but it's the knowledge that is very much power as well, right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with power, but power must be aligned with the divine will. And what could be some of the possible constructive uses, shall we say, evolutionary uses for this science? Well, the first I would say is hygiene, defense, just like what the physical sciences have done. Wash your hands before an operation. That used to be quite rare. We cannot imagine, but doctors of the past apparently did not wash their hands before conducting operations, and the result is obvious. So, I mean, future ages will look at us and say, how can we do this kind of things where we do not have defense against the dark arts, defense against the dark forces, right? So the integral sciences will help us to have a much more developed way in which we can reject and push out those forces of darkness and falsehood that beset every human civilization, every human being. Right now, we are often quite helpless against them, only in a relative sense. If you truly, sincerely reject them, they go. But regardless, we can do much better than that in a collective sense. Much, much better than that. We can improve our health. We can address the deeper roots of disharmony, which is really another word for disease. We can have a much better form of education, because a clearer understanding of human potential will lead to a much greater variety to achieve this. This is, of course, linking the next few talks in this series. We will have a greater self-mastery. Right now, we do not master ourselves because we do not truly know ourselves. So if we do not know ourselves, we are being pushed around literally by other parts of ourselves that are not in harmony with our outer being. And so a true and full inner self-mastery can only come from a full and true self-knowledge. And it is, and of course, in the future, this I will not go into, I talked about it in previous talks, the actualization of the supramental body. So actually, if you really think about it, it's truly, truly something wonderful what the integral sciences has the potential to achieve, the kind of wonders it can bring to human life on a collective level. I keep on emphasizing that. It's not about individual human beings doing funny or miraculous things. It's about if we come together, working together to achieve it, it will, I mean, the current wonders of physical sciences only give the faintest echo of what is possible once we do all these things, which is why we should be fundamentally optimistic about the direction of human civilization. Despite all the darkness, all the chaos we see, and whatever pain and whatever hour of God we may have to pass through before we reach that. But we can and should be fundamentally optimistic. We just think quite rationally about what an integral view of reality work and what we working together can achieve. Having said all that, for these wonderful things to come true, we need to have a necessary foundation for the integral sciences in the future. In fact, a lack of a proper foundation is precisely the problem why there's so many problems with the physical sciences. Or fundamentally, many scientists potentially, I'm not saying many of them or even all of them, much less all of them like that, but some scientists could be people with very bright minds, but very dark hearts. And that is a fundamental problem. Essentially, to qualify to be a scientist, you do not need to have you do not even need to be ethical in the full sense of the word. You need to be ethical in experimentation. It's good if you are an ethical person, but you can be a really powerful and great scientist without fundamentally being ethical beyond the experimentation side. We do have scientists building biological weapons, building drones to kill people. We have plenty of scientists building nuclear weapons and worse stuff. So you do not need to, you basically need a very bright mind and will and some respect for experimentation ethics to be a scientist. And that is a problem, a big, big problem, in fact. So we need to the integral sciences cannot be like that. If you look at the ancient integral sciences, so I talked about Tibetan tantras, right, in the past, we have lost really what the Egyptians did, but presumably they have lots of safeguards as well. So if we base it, say, on the Tibetans, who are a clear, widely known model, so to speak, due to tragic reasons, but still. The first is we ideally should have psychic compassion and guidance. That means before you become an integral scientist, it's ideal you have cultivated compassion in your heart. You cultivated your heart. It's even more ideal if the psychic being is quite active and the psychic love and compassion and guidance is right in front. And we need a strong self-mastery and integration. And thirdly, we need intellectual, preferably experiential mastery of some kind of integral view of existence. All three, actually, interestingly, to some degree, are found in as a preparation before you can practice the tantras in the Tibetan Buddhism. And they are quite commonsensical things to have, to be frank. If you are going to give someone with the knowledge of the planes and the power that comes with it, it's quite obvious that before initiation and so on, you will want to have at least these three. And with the above, then we can talk about bringing forward of the subliminal mind, vital, body, and all the capacities. We can talk about developing concentration, silencing of the consciousness. We can bring in initiation and empowerment. In fact, the initiation and empowerment tends to be the safeguard for those who are familiar with such traditions, right? I mean, going into matters a little mysterious, generally speaking, I would say that, I mean, there are not many people who can tap on the raw energy of the inner worlds. It's like lightning, right? Few people are crazy enough to go out there and poke some metal rod into the ground and say, come, lightning, strike me, and we'll use this as the electricity. I mean, a few people are crazy or mad enough to do that. Benjamin Franklin apparently did that, but that aside, generally when we tap electricity, what do? We switch on the light. We use the power generators that's set up for us. So using the analogy, occult systems, so to speak, are like that. You do not go out there and ask lightning to you because it's exceedingly dangerous. You generally go with a certain system in which the occult forces, so to speak, are already tied to a certain system, tied to certain mantras, tied to certain teachers, and so on and so forth. So usually, as they say, the mantras do not work until your initiation. And that's part of the reason. It's like the light switch will not work until you attach the generator. So that is a kind of safeguard. So a true teacher will not attach an unready student to the power generator if the student is clearly not ready yet. So you go through trials and tribulations and so-called, that kind of thing. So I would say that in a certain sense, even though occultism sounds more dangerous than the physical sciences, yet in the other sense, there's a certain safeguard that's there that will still be there in the future. Yeah, it's not like the whole world turns into paradise. There will still be a certain safeguard that's quite necessary, even if the light has increased in society and all that. So this is something that is quite important. So coming to the last part of the talk, I know I'm running out of time. What are the signs that we are seeing this renaissance? When I say renaissance, of course, I'm saying that it's a rebirth, right? And in my previous talks, I've talked about how I believe that Atlantis, however defined and called, represents a layer of civilization where mankind has gone to develop our mental subjectivism, the inner sciences, to a very, very high degree before. In other words, this is not the first time we're doing it. We have done it before, or at least there was a very, very gifted civilization or small group of civilizations that has done it before, what we may call the Atlantean era. But of course, we all know how it ended, right? In the sea. So it went under. So the world wasn't ready at that point. But as I described, we have gone through much since then, since the fall of Atlantis. And these are things I have talked about in the previous talks, so I'm not going to go into those much again. But I argue that because the information age is reaching its climax, the spread of the informational paradigms, the end of the vitalistic age, meant vital subjectivism at the close of World War II, the spread of various kinds of tantras, and most importantly, of course, the descent of the supramental and Superman consciousness that represents a great acceleration. All these together, to me, tells us that we are on the cusp of the mental subjectivist age, which means inherently we are on the cusp of the rebirth of the integral sciences. Should we say the rebirth of the Atlantean curve? Another thing which I never talked about in previous talks, which I thought is interesting to draw on, is also the expansion of the fantasy genre. So we see that in the last 50, 60 years, there's been this explosion of what we can call fantasy literature. The most well-known Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Wheel of Time by Michael Jordan, and in Japan, we have the Japanese anime, many of which are based on the fantasy genre, like Full Metal Alchemist, the Studio Ghibli stuff, which I think, and in China and India, of course, they are equivalent. So this rebirth, or not, should I say this explosion of the fantasy genre, I would say is very telling, because much of this fantasy genre is often based, I would say, on some kind of, they may be based on imagination, but there's often an inspiration behind it, an inspiration about what the inner sciences really are, and sometimes an inspiration about what happened in the previous cycle of mental subjectivism. So Tolkien is a good example. Those of us who are Tolkien fans might know that this story about the fall of Numenor, which is really just Atlantis, is the prequel of Lord of the Rings, right? He wrote this story because since childhood, I believe, he has this recurring dream that never left him of a huge wave that comes and swallows him. So he keep on dreaming of this giant wave that swallows him, which is shown on this book cover, by the way. And only after he wrote down the story, the Fall of Numenor, which is, as I said, really Atlantis, that this dream left him. So, I mean, when it's described like that, it seems like Tolkien might be drawing on some kind of, in the collective unconscious, right, about the fall of this previous cycle of civilization. No doubt he turned it into something that is a travesty in some ways, to be honest, even though I love Tolkien, but I really think he has too much of a mental construction that's layered onto the inspiration. By contrast, Michael Jordan, this American author, whose series has been recently made into Amazon series, right? In fact, yeah, the great big tech has been making many of these fantasy stuff into into very, very popular movies and TV series. Michael Jordan's one, I believe, cuts closer to, so should we say, the truth or history or whatever you call it? Because those of us who read The Wheel of Time will know that in The Wheel of Time, there is a previous cycle of civilization, a world civilization where the inner and outer sciences are in harmony and extremely developed. And you can see that in the top picture, but it was sort of destroyed by a self-made cataclysm that's reminiscent of the fall of Atlantis. So the Wheel of Time novels actually take place in this post-apocalyptic age where this harmonious integral civilization has already been destroyed. And they are on the cusp of a great war, which will eventually lead to a certain recovery. So I always found the Wheel of Time to be very, very interesting because actually I think that Michael Jordan, knowingly or not, may be drawing on again a kind of inner inspiration, a kind of hidden memories of this hidden world. And it's all resurfacing, right? It's all resurfacing because the Wheel of Time is immensely popular and now it's made into this Amazon series. And of course, in video games and movies, yeah, I'll just very quickly show 1-2 minutes. So I think that video games and movies using a fantasy genre is also very interesting because it allows you to live through the experiences. Yeah. And so even if you do not have, and so it brings it really literally to life. Let's quickly show it. Yeah. Okay, so I think there's no sound, right? But you get the idea. It's like a virtual reality kind of game, right? So you just enter into it, you become a wizard in Hogwarts. And you play the video game, you're literally living through this thing, cultivating the inner sciences and all that kind of stuff. Of course, Harry Potter, the magic in there is infantile kind of magic. Is you're basically waving a wand and using certain magic words and things happen. That is very, very far from what the integral sciences will be, although it captures a very superficial level of it. But regardless, that's not the point, right? The point is that throughout the world, through the fantasy genre and through the other developments which I talked about, I mean, the inner sciences has come to life for so many people. It's mainstream. I mean, if you ask most teenagers, ask them what is a spell and how do you cast a spell and what a wizard is, they're able to tell you, it's quite well known. So actually, to me, that is actually preparing the way for the rebirth of the integral sciences, because it is a kind of mainstream idea, really, more or less. And many, many, many young people want to go to Hogwarts, want to become Harry Potter. Well, to me, that is exactly a kind of preparation. This is a kind of aspiration, yeah. And that those kind of aspirations shared on a collective level will have its result. Okay, so I think I think I will just end here. The further reading is in the slides. So for those who might want to find out more, I'll just leave them in there. So I think more interesting, we just open up Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Yes, it's quite a full picture of the different future possibilities and popping up all this new mythology and creating new mythology on the ground of the old. We can see also many films from Indian mythological literature about Krishna, about Shiva, and there are a long series of Mahabharata, and everybody is attracted to this way of thinking. It's kind of interesting that among these different genre, we have more technological and more mythological. So to say, there are two different movements, as it were. One is covering more technology. It's like, this the Star Wars and so on, and the other is speaking more about the inequalities and powers of the soul, of the truth, of the sincerity, and so on. And it's quite amazing that in our Lagrange Center, we adopted this view to develop these two parts of the faculties of consciousness as technology of consciousness, the skills, how to operate with the mind, this occultism you are referring to, and the other is verities, the qualities of the soul, like sincerity, humility. All of them have to be developed to become, for us to be able to operate with these skills and faculties in a proper, more human way or more divine way, as it were. So these two are going hand in hand. And as we know from the Gebserian overview, that these belong to two different structures of consciousness, yes? One is, so to say, science is the magic structure objectivized, as it were. The magic structure objectivized is mental structure, and the other is mythical structure, which has to come forward also. And we can see it happening already in Harry Potter, because it's not only the skill and power, it's also the quality of the being. And that quality of the being and the power are kind of go hand in hand and struggle. And we see this struggle. This is an amazing kind of time for us to move towards subjective age and to incorporate all these structures. This is my kind of take from your presentation, which is quite amazing, and thank you for this. There are several questions here. There are also several people here. Marco Masi, I thought we could invite him to make some comments or ask some questions. Marco, are you there? Would you like to talk? We can give you promote you to panelist, and you can say a few words if you like. We had a marvelous course with him on spirit and nature just before. So it would be interesting to see his take on this presentation. So I do not know whether if Marco, you are there and want to talk, so please, can you raise your hand? Then I promote you to panelist.
Or just text and, oh, somebody did. Was that him that's raised his hand? No.
And there are several more people. Dawn is here, and
I'm going to bring Marco over. He raised his hand.
Okay, lovely. So it would be some question from Marco first, and then we will go with what is written. So you can unmute yourself, Marco, and switch on camera. Yeah, thank you. No sound? Okay, we can hear you, I think. Try. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, but you took me a bit of surprise. So,
we've been texting you all the time. We've been sending texts to you, and you haven't seen them. We were hoping you'd come over. Thank you.
Yeah.
No
But
problem.
I have the
WhatsApp.
chat disabled. On WhatsApp. So no,
Alright,
yeah, okay. Yes. I
No
shut
problem.
it down now because otherwise people phone obviously. Yeah, okay. So yeah, very interesting talk, Jared, and I resonate a lot with that, especially when you speak about this fact that occult powers are there and we still maybe not so ready to have a full understanding and comprehension of these things. I sometimes see this myself, also speaking with other people, and I have the impression that we would make a lot of mess out of it if we would jump to this integral science, which is, yeah. But thank you very much, Jared, for that. So I don't see the questions.
Well, the questions are for Jared anyhow.
Yeah.
I thought that you may make some comment or review or whatever. That would be lovely if you could do it. So you did. So thank you. We just wanted to see you to be part of this enterprise because you did such a marvelous work with us, presenting your book. He wrote a book which became the foundation for our course. Spirit calls matter. Or nature calls spirit, or spirit calls nature, rather. So how
matter
to
also.
Yes, matter. And so this was the role of science in general, what science may offer, how science is changing, what exactly these topics which you addressed today, Jared. So he is Don also, he may just pose his questions straight to you, and that would be the best way. Please, Don.
Hi, folks. Hi.
I don't. You're muted.
You're muted. Unmute yourself
Okay.
for some reason.
Hello, everyone. Is that better? Hello, Lagras, Marco, Jared. That was wonderful. Marco and I have been talking for over a year about many of the topics you brought up. I have a question, but I want to leap into what Bill and what Marco said. I felt for years, I've observed with the increase in fantasy and video games and interest in lucid dreams, that there's this, since the descent of the supermental, this increasing openness. I see it in young people, especially to the subliminal. And, I'm sure everyone here knows that Sri Aurobindo's writings on the intermediate zone, and it's so dangerous. I'm so glad that you mentioned in your summary the necessity for the bringing forth of the psychic being. I wrote to Vladimir, I said, I think Harrison Ford in Star Wars was drawing on some psychic qualities, but that's a different thing. I do have a question. Yeah, okay, so, and Marco may have been in this group. Back in the 90s, I had an online integral psychology group. And we all agreed, in order for integral science to start, you need to share experiences. My idea, I think it could happen in our lifetime, that you get people who are able to enter the dream world consciously. We call them lucid dreams, but it's the same. To me, the lucid dreams, the best of it, is the same thing Mother and Sri Aurobindo talk about, being conscious of your nights. Okay. I think that it could happen. I've talked to other people in the lucid dream science community that it could happen. We finally learn to enter the dream world together. But in order to do this, number one, have that psychic connection. But number two, you need to share experiences. So here's my question. Everyone throughout history, and Mother Sri Aurobindo have cautioned too, you don't ever share your inner experiences. So here was our solution. I want to ask you yours. We said in our group, we said, if you have a group of truly dedicated explorers, and you're very careful, and you're not going to just say things, haphazard, but you're very careful to share things that then it's going to be safe. So I'm curious to hear what you think. How do you get past that problem that you said, not just intellectual, but experiential, right? How do you get past the problem of integral scientists sharing yogic experiences?
do you mean how do we verify the authenticity of these occult and spiritual experiences?
Well, Andy, like if you talk about, well, yes, I've realized the self, there's so much room for ego in all this, so all of that. Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah, so as you rightly say, I mean, sharing spiritual experiences has some inherent problems. The mother, in fact, generally discourage it, as some of us will know. And spiritual experiences can lose its power if you just talk about it vulgarly or with ego. So it's certainly not recommended. Having said that, I mean, the integral sciences does not only cover experiences of the divine. It covers all kinds of experiences of the ladder of creation, right? Yeah. So there is also the problem, I would say, the problem of authenticity and verification is the same in physical sciences. I think how the older schools deal with that problem is quite obviously is through the guru, right? Through a strict process of having initiated teachers who sort of will be the one who will verify it for you and who will guide you in the inner world. So if you say, oh, I realize the self, and it will be the guru who will verify for you. Did you really realize the self? And it's also a general spiritual rule that if you are talking to your teacher, your spiritual teacher about it, in that spirit, it's fine. Yeah, so that was how the old paths deal with it. I think old paths gives a huge importance to the so-called expert, precisely for this reason, for protection, for verification, and so on and so forth. Having said that, that's obviously maybe not the only way, and certainly as we evolve the integral sciences, I think it probably will become a more community-based kind of thing. That really is something I don't want to fully speculate on, but I suspect, just like lucid dreaming, where more and more people have gained this ability, this Wikipedia of the spirit might work as well, you know what I mean? They might work with a community, may take more and more the place of the guru. That is intuitively where I see it evolving, but really we are in such an early stage. From the people I have experiences with, I have known of two extraordinary lucid dreamers I introduced lucid dreaming to certain people over time, and I met two who you would just call them prodigies. Within 1-2 nights, they became permanent lucid dreamers, and they have quite powerful faculties in other directions. For these two, I think generally they still go by the so-called guru system. They will have beings guiding them. They will have teachers guiding them. I will put it that way. So, I mean, we're all in the early stage, but this is a very, very interesting question. And I would say lucid dreaming is definitely one of the key avenues. It's certainly true in my experiences, in the people I interacted with. It's one of the key openings that more and more people are gaining access to. And there's good so-called scientific studies of it, right? Like Stephen LaBerge in Stanford. Although there's not much follow-up for what I know. Yeah, but yeah, so yeah, that's a very interesting topic.
Well, by the way, you should join our conscious dream course in this case. Yeah, we have the whole course. It would be lovely. You could bring your also experience into it. Yeah. And there is one more. There is one more question from Marco Masi. Yeah, so comment. Please, Marco, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you sleep during these Zoom sessions, so what do you do? but okay, you will explain me this later. My question to Jared is also perhaps a more third-person perspective, and which, in a certain sense, I have already an answer to this, but I would like to hear also of other perspectives or other people of other opinions. And if you see nowadays some concrete discoveries in science that indicate that we are going towards, if not an integral science, but to a widening of the science as we know it nowadays. You know, there is this classical understanding of Newtonian or Cartesian science, and that's Galileo, Newton, etc. until nowadays. Integral science takes also up this subjective perspective, no? First-person perspective, and tries to integrate it. Do you see some intimation in modern science that goes towards this direction, or discoveries, particular discoveries that are made that suggest that we might go into this direction, or is it too early, according to your point of view?
I mean, there are probably people here who are much better qualified than me, who has gone through the scientific training. The only so-called science I have some significant acquaintance with is probably computer science. So I'll probably answer from a more general angle. And as I said, there are more qualified people. I would say probably the three great paradigms of evolution, of this monism that Sri Aurobindo already pointed out in physics, this driving towards the unification of the forces in physics. And lastly, the simulation hypothesis that is inspired by computer science. These are broad paradigms, right? These broad paradigms certainly will have a place in the integral view of reality. Certainly evolution and monism is very much central to Sri Aurobindo. He did not obviously draw on the simulation hypothesis because that is something pretty recent. For those who are not familiar, it means about how this whole thing we see is actually the generation of a kind of supercomputer, a kind of supermind in that sense, and we're all living in the matrix. Yeah, there is a room for that. In fact, that is what should be predicted if we are entering into the age of mental subjectivism, that we use mind, a kind of informational paradigm to explain the whole of the universe. But as I say, my understanding of, say, physics or whatever is not that of someone who has trained 7 years doing it. So I do not want to infringe on people. This is all I know from a layman's perspective.
It's right that there is this monistic tendency also among physicists to say that we should unite all the fundamental forces. One could also ask why. Let them be separate.
Yeah.
And why do they have this urge to unite them? It is more of a psychological necessity more than a scientific. And I think you're right. You're pointing out something quite interesting.
Well, Sri Aurobindo pointed out, although I fleshed it out with the unification, which is a more recent thing. Yeah, so it's intuition, I guess, because it's Sri Aurobindo always say there's kind of intuition that lies behind our reasoning processes. Yeah, so I would say that's probably where it is. There are probably others. I mean, it will be this is a very, very important thing. So while, as you rightly say, there is dangers in this pursuit, and the psychic attitude is hugely needed. Yeah, but regardless, humanity is moving ahead. I mean, like it or not, we are going into it. So the ancient safeguards, which I pointed out just now, and of course, most importantly, if we can have the psychic safeguard, is of enormous importance. But regardless, I mean, in a way, the fact is that physical science is really dabbling in all kinds of highly dangerous forces with no safeguards at all. So like it or not, we are in the journey.
Yeah, and this definition of Sri Aurobindo, illusion of the obvious, is a very good term, actually, explaining a lot, because the obvious, from obvious, Sri Aurobindo says, only obvious arrives. So you cannot we have to dive deeper into the hidden processes of things. And there we come to this subliminal, to the deeper realms, to the occult, hidden. And there those forces define the obvious. So if we don't have that connection and that clarity, then we will be, in the hands of the hidden forces. And there we are not ourselves. Yes, Don.
I know it's almost time. One more thing I thought of that Marco emphasizes a lot, we didn't mention, we've been talking a lot about the dangers of the subliminal, but one thing that I think Marco emphasizes so much in his book, which is so important, is the higher levels. Even if you haven't risen stably to the higher mind, that you know examples like this discovery of the benzene molecule in chemistry and other mathematical formulas where scientists open to these higher levels. But I think an integral, one of the exciting things, and I noticed someone wrote, I think is involved with communities, when you have communities that are integrally oriented, you can reach a level of silence and openness of the heart that you have more opening to these inspirations. I think there you can share those experiences with less danger. You can talk about what it's like to be quiet and receptive. Perhaps, not everyone may be followers of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, but whatever their divine presence they're open to, they begin to, like, for example, if you're researching bees, that you begin to see the patterns, like Vladimir talks about faculties of consciousness, and people hear it and think it's some intellectual thing. You begin to open to these higher mind ways of seeing and hearing and thinking. I think that's possible without being super mentalized, hopefully. So I wanted to say that's an important part of the future science, I think.
This brings me to just one quick sharing. I think what Don made is very, very important, that in certain communities, there's a greater light and safeguard. In fact, I think that's part of the reason why a collective activity is actually very important. Yeah, just a quick sharing that this idea of a safeguard within our subliminal in lucid dream, I just recall that, I was mentioning there were these two persons that had these abilities. One of the first thing I usually ask them to do is to do something like build a dream mandala in a kind of sense. That means first invoke the divine consciousness like a temple, right? Like a sacred space within the dream space, and center the entire dream around it. Usually when we do lucid dreaming, it's not unusual to build a so-called home base, right? Where you start off flying from different locations. And in the center of the home base is always the divine presence, or at least we should try our best to invoke, like what Don said, the divine presence in some way. For both cases, that was the case. And that is the important safeguard that needs to be there, among other things. Okay, maybe if we don't want to make people feel too left out, should we quickly address the remaining questions?
Yeah, there are a few questions here, and I will read out one of them, two of them. So how do we believe the new without upsetting the balance between our growing superconscious selves and inconscient world? How to manage the bit in the middle is what I'm asking. So we get integration, not separation. Yes, that is what we are doing, I believe.
This is what we are doing. Yeah, so I guess Hugh probably feels that it's answered. Yeah, so I think, so this is what the very method of integral sciences is to understand what is in between the superconscious, which does not need our help, and the inconscious, which does not want our help. It's managing the middle part.
The one way where we can answer this, or just to hint the answer, that the world is in the making. It's not the world which we are here to perceive and to connect already, and everything is given. We are making it by transforming the subconscious worlds, or the inconscient being in us, unregenerated, unconscious layers of existence into more and more conscious and perceptive of the higher light. And in this process of constant transformation and working out, we are creating a new world. It's not the world that we have to perceive and that's it. We discovered what is there. And this is the major problem of science, that they believe that they have to discover what is there already given, and we have nothing to do with it. And it's not totally true.
Yep. Quantum physics has something to say about that. I'll leave it to the quantum physicists to say it. But Okay, should we answer the other questions or we just leave
Or
it?
they disappeared from the screen because I think our time is up already quite a bit.
Okay.
Thank
Maybe
you.
I just
We will
close-
send you those questions
Mm.
separately, Jared. And so if you answer them, that would be lovely. And we hope to meet with you again and to continue this dialogue. This is very important for us. Actually, we
Yeah.
dedicated a lot of time to it, and we want to develop this
So
direction.
before we close, I just like to have a quick closing that I think is also very important, because I gave a previous talk on what I call the foundation, right? The double foundation of yoga. So I just like to point out that actually it is important, especially if we consider ourselves people doing the integral yoga, that our work in the integral sciences should be done as a karma yoga. That means as far as possible, in a spirit of selflessness, offering to the divine. It should not be detached from yoga itself. Of course, it can be done like that, but if since we are in this circle where we are doing spiritual, we are doing yoga, right? So maybe there's something I did not maybe put it so clearly in the talk, even though I talked about the fly kick, is that ultimately it is a form of divine service to seek for the truth like that and to dynamize this knowledge like that. It should not be done as ego or even just mere curiosity or due to some mental idealism. As far as possible, especially since if we consider ourselves yogins, then we need to do it as a form of divine work as far as possible. Probably I will just close with that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It is a very good message and very needed, that the divine manifestation will take place directly without, deviations and without long passages through the jungle. Thank you very much, Jared and everyone, and Marco and Dawn.
Jared. Thank you.